All right, here we go. And funny enough, Ken and I actually engaged or met each other on LinkedIn, which is sort of a lot of how business seems to go today. And you definitely, from you and your content, you definitely do a very good job of touching on the technical, which is rare in our industry. But also, what I want this discussion to be um, is really revolved around the differences in the residential versus the commercial market. Frankly speaking, I don't really spend a lot of time in the residential market. When we say residential, I mean luxury, high end. Think your $25 million mansions and the implications with
Right.
that for someone that wants to spend
Single
more on
family
the glazing.
homes as opposed to the multi-family high rise, because you're mostly operating in New York City, where everything's high rises or townhomes and that sort of thing.
Right.
And
Even so, in the Florida market, we get some exposure to hurricane up in the Northeast because of, as you said earlier, Sandy, but also even Florida on the commercial side. So let me shut my mouth for a second and let you introduce yourself, and then we can get right into it.
Yeah, so I'm Ken Sandlin. I am an independent fenestration consultant. My specialty is the luxury single-family homes in the hurricane zone. I've been operating in Southeast Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward County, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach for 2 decades now, all throughout the Caribbean, and I've seen a lot of changes in the 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 architecture, the products, the evolution has just been extraordinary, and it's been accelerating. And my unique perspective is that I have worked with the architects from early design development, hand in hand with the architect and the client, design meetings as they're designing the home around the windows and doors. Because in Miami Beach, these giant contemporary homes really evolved over the past 10 to 12 years. Uh, Everybody wants bigger glass, taller, wider, uh, more glass, less frames, less structure, indoor outdoor living, as seamless and minimal as possible. And it's really been dependent on what the products are tested for. So I've always been a really nerdy product guy down in the weeds of the details and the product approvals, because down here you cannot operate outside of what has been tested. And if a
Mhm.
manufacturer hasn't tested their products, that specific size, that particular configuration, you cannot use it. Just will not be approved by the building department. Everything has to be rigorously approved through the building departments down here. One of the more difficult places to build, actually. And so in helping the architects design the size of their openings, I mean, you want to do a 25-foot wide, 12-foot tall, double open corner pocket. Well, you're fairly limited on what you can do and exactly what those sizes are, and what products that are available. And a few years ago, nobody had that, and now there's all these new products coming to market. It's an arms race. And so in keeping up with all the products that are being tested, approved, and brought to market, um, and from the design development, and then I was also working in the field. I was running a dealer, uh, where we had a really a phenomenal installation manager. And so I spent most of the past decade out there as the shell was being built, because they're so complicated. The architecture changed so much that the builders were almost out of their depth in a lot of cases. And because I'd been working with the architect through design development, I knew all the nuances of how to plan. 'Cause down here we build everything out of solid concrete. It's all poured poured columns, steel columns, concrete block, poured first and second floor roof. It's a solid concrete bunker, so there's not a lot of flexibility in that kind of construction. So I would be walking the contractor through building his shell, and then once installation started, getting everything laid out. So very unique perspective, because most other window dealers, they're either selling or they're doing a little early design, not usually involved through the whole process. I've had projects take 4 years through that process. And 3 to 5,000 square feet of glass. I mean, they're small commercial projects, really.
So it's interesting you said you really well you operate in this very niche area of the market, and so we talk about generalities in this industry and trends, but when you get to such a small sector and such a very high end clientele, and they're very nitpicky about what they want, a lot of your general rules of construction don't always apply. They kind of go by the wayside, and they want what they want. And you said you listened to the episode with Samir designed some of the most notorious prominent high-rise buildings in New York City and elsewhere. And in that sector of the market, an owner might be willing to spend more on a particular design or systems because they're very keen on what they want, because in their eyes they're either holding these buildings or these are landmarks that are going to stand out in a New York City, in a Hong Kong, whatever market. When you're working through that design stage and with the builder and the architect and finding the right supplier, when you get to the point of, okay, this is what we're specifying and this is what they're going for, do you have maybe 3 or 4 manufacturers or suppliers that can do it? Or is it so specialty that once the design and person kind of specifies this is what we want, heights, system type, there's only 1 or 2 people that can do it?
It used to be much more limited, but over the past 5 years, we've seen a lot more companies coming to market, and a lot of that's driven by the increase in severity and frequency of storms. Hurricane Sandy was a major wake-up call, because before, the real hurricane zone was this tiny, tiny little market down in Southeast Florida, and then maybe some other people might use it. When you're looking at manufacturers that are supplying national markets, and it's a major investment. I mean, every single product that you have tested and approved through the state of Florida or Miami-Dade, I mean, that's $50,000 to $100,000 to get that product approval per product, per test, and those are often changing over the years as they make updates to their product mix. So, and as the demand has broadened up into New England and the Hamptons and all along the coast, the Gulf Coast, and it's a much larger market, and so it's much more cost. It's better cost benefit for the manufacturers to invest in that, and so we're seeing many more manufacturers come to market. But then, of course, there's still nuances of what those sizes are, what the configurations are, what kind of tracks they have, what their sight lines are, and that gets into a lot of those aesthetics. And then the budget. Budget is a huge factor.
Do you find, well, all right, I want to go back to budget in a second, but do you find manufacturers developing custom systems for certain projects in the residential market, or it's usually always something that they have off the shelf?
Usually they try to have a product tested that's going to have as many applications as possible. Unfortunately, some of the manufacturers that come into the market that aren't familiar with it, they don't realize all the different configurations that have to be planned for and incorporated into that test. And then once you have the engineer test it, they have to shoot the 2x4 at it, as you showed that great video, and cycle test it. Then it's and that's a year-long process for a lot of these tests. And if they miss certain things, I had a manufacturer come to me 10 12 years ago, and they were so excited. Well, we just got our hurricane approvals, and we've got a 40 PSF design pressure. And I said, I can't use that anywhere. If you spend $100,000, you can use it in the like far west, away from the coast, but nothing within 5 miles of the coast in the high velocity hurricane zones, not going to meet the pressures. And so it's like, all right, so they sold a little bit here and there, and several years later, then they spent another $100,000 and got everything tested to the sizes, configurations, pressures, so that they could be used. So it's a test where they want to have as wide a market application as possible. Very rarely do they do a single site specific test, but there are cases where they do. I know a project that we did the windows and doors on. They sourced the entry door from South America. I think it was Brazil, because the owners were from Brazil. The lead architect was from Brazil, and they wanted this 7-foot wide, 24-foot tall single pivot door, and there wasn't anything available, and so they got special approvals. They still used a hurricane screen, but they went through a whole process to be able to use that in their house, because like money is not that important when it comes to showing off.
Oh, yes. Yes. What do you think Florida has gone overboard is the wrong word. I look at how difficult it is to get through that, not only approval process, it's very doable, but not only that, then you make one slight modification, you have to do it all over again. Why do you think the approval process in Florida in general has become so stringent around those boundaries, yet you go to all different parts of markets, geographies, climates, and it's like not only the code requirements are a little easier, but the level of enforcement isn't there. So why do you think Florida ratcheted that up so aggressively?
Because after Hurricane Andrew, when all the hurricane testing started to be required, it was a huge learning curve. And the there was a lot of products that weren't properly tested, had questionable engineering, and so it's really kind of a wild west. And for a long time, Miami-Dade County was the only authority, and so manufacturers had to submit through Miami-Dade County. And I think it was around 2009, 2010, the state of Florida, Tallahassee, said you can submit to the state of Florida for the high velocity hurricane zone, still meet the International Construction Code ASTM TAS standards for whatever your wind pressures are, your wind speeds, and the impact testing. The high velocity hurricane zone has 3 impacts. You have to hit it center of blast, on the frame, and then by the corner, and then cycle test it. And that's 3,500 positive negative pressure tests. And that's one of the things that really most people don't understand. That's the most rigorous part. The impact test is the most flashy and it's like, wow, but the cyclic pressure is where everything passes or fails. And when you're looking at so the category D, it's a 9-pound 9-pound 2x4 at 34 miles per hour. If you're looking at 50 to 60 pounds per square foot on 50 square feet, so a 5x10 panel, you're looking at 2,500 to 3,000 pounds of force. So essentially, you're setting a car on this, pushing and pulling 3,500 times. So in a lot of cases, the glass will get sucked out of the frame, or the window will get sucked out of the wall if it's not anchored structurally. And that's all part of the engineering testing that has to go through and be followed all through the process. Miami's kind of a third world country in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of money there, but there's a lot of, my old boss said, it's a sunny place for shady people.
Well,
so
have you witnessed failures in the lab?
In the lab, oh yeah, a lot of manufacturers fail all the time. And they'll submit, and it wasn't, and especially as they're pushing the envelopes, that until you put it in the test chamber, you think it's going to pass, but that is just such incredible destructive testing that it's very, very regular failures, and they have to go back to the lab and they have to readjust their extrusions, their reinforcing, the way that they glaze it. Some manufacturers use a dry glaze, and that works up to a certain size and pressure. But when you use the structural glazing, which and you're familiar with on your curtain wall systems, and a down 995 or whichever, and that is structurally holding that glass to the frame, and it's not going to let go until you get past a certain point. I was going down to the Cayman Islands.
Go on.
They got hit by Hurricane Ivan in 2004. A Category 5 was over the island for almost 3 days. It was very slow, very intense. It was just catastrophic. And I went down there in 2005 after it hit, and there were so many stories of people had used hurricane-rated windows. They weren't anchored properly, and they were just intact windows and doors that were just laying on the ground because they were built okay, but they weren't installed to structurally transfer that load to the surrounding structure, or the structure wasn't designed properly, and the roofs were blown off. And just I've personally seen where if it's not really properly tested, installed, and the stories from Hurricane Maria and Irma down in the British Virgin Islands. Richard Branson was in his house down there on Necker Island, hunkered down in the basement as the Category 5 came over, and they were getting gusts to 200 miles an hour down there. Really intense storm. And they had products that were using laminated glass that were built in the Caribbean, beautiful mahogany folding doors, used a lot in that part of the Caribbean, blown out. Just everything was, the roof superstructure was still there because it was all steel, but all the walls were gone, all the folding doors were gone, everything inside was blown out, just catastrophic. And the manufacturer said, like, well, we glazed it with laminated glass. It's like, well, yeah.
So that's what people
The
are
real world
worried
is
about.
harsh.
The glass, and we
Mhm.
structurally glaze all our fixed and operable lights just for that rigidity, because I do worry not only from the structural standpoint, but handling that glass displacement. All of a sudden, you risk that perimeter seal for air water leakage. But obviously, in the hurricane zones, the structural requirements take precedent over everything. So I would think that through some type of engineering rational analysis, if you're running your calcs and deflection on your mullions or your framing members to make sure that you're hitting that I value, and you're using laminated glass as per usual, and you're structurally glazing, what are typically the points of failure? I mean, I guess like if it's a captured window, now it's one thing if it's a SSG system and the glass is just completely exposed. If you don't get that good structural silicone bite, yeah, the glass is going to go flying right off. In a captured system, and they still worried about the glass dislocating.
I've heard so many stories of people that we get storms all the time down here. We got Wilma, we got Katrina came over. When I first moved here 20 years ago, and there were three storms. The state got 4 storms. I got hit by Francis and then Gene in West Palm Beach, and just the stories of people that are in their houses with impact windows or non-impact windows, and they watch the glass bowing and literally moving several inches because of the pressures, and like that's scary. And if it's not impact glass, then like there's a certain point where that's just going to blow out. But even with impact glass, if it's not captured within that system structurally to the frame, and then the frame, if it's a sliding glass door or a folding door or a casement window, and if it's not structurally anchored to its surrounding frame, any one of these points can fail. If the casement lock had many people that, and they got 20, 30 casements around their house, and one of them wasn't fully engaged, and sash was sucked out.
What is the general, I guess, feeling in the market about operable windows? I mean, here we have our ventilation requirements, so a certain percentage of the floor area has to be naturally ventilated. You go to other markets and they say it's not what we do here, or it's all fixed windows. And you would think, maybe they incorporate some type of louver vent system. But if I was buying a home and you either wanted to ventilate the kitchen or something, who would not want an operable window in their home? So is there a different discussion in the residential versus commercial market? In the residential, is incorporating a lot of operables kind of business as usual?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of that depends on the climate. I spent 20 years in South Florida. I'm currently living in North Florida, and I love opening the windows for months out of the year because it's very temperate, very nice, cool air, fairly dry. In South Florida, it is always hot and humid, and it's miserable. So as we're designing these giant homes, they're all walls of glass. So there's tons of floor to ceiling fixed windows, but so much of it's sliding glass doors. We're designing these houses to be opened up, and we always joke, well, you're really only going to open these doors fully maybe 5 or 6 times a year in the winter when you're entertaining. I know. Then houses where the entire first floor is all sliding glass doors and it's automated. You hit a button on your smartphone and the entire house opens up, and you're rarely ever going to do that. But if you have a party and Art Basil's going on and all your billionaire friends are in town from around the world, and open the whole thing up, and it's like 72 degrees outside and it's cool and it's breezy, and the humidity's down for a change, then those are the times where it's fun to be able to do that. But a lot of times we may have a couple of casement windows in these houses, mostly big sliding glass doors that nobody ever opens because they're under 20 AC 24/7. But that's South Florida. Like I said, it depends on the climate, and in other areas, we want a little bit more ventilation. But a lot of times in these big contemporary homes, it's all floor to ceiling windows.
So this is a conversation I can continue to have. Is laminated glass is the norm just because of the code requirement, but is insulated common in the residential market or not yet?
So it's very common. It's required by the code. Everybody has to meet the national energy codes depending on what climate zone that they're in. Southeast Florida is the only ASHRAE Climate Zone 1 tropical, where the temperature doesn't vary more than 20 degrees. So it's the only place where you can get by using laminated non-insulated glass, and it's all about the solar heat gain because the sun is so intense and it's all radiated heat. So anything that you can do to keep the heat out, and I live on the energy calculators. Vitro has a great one where every different glass makeup and color and tint, like every different type of coating and combination thereof, and it's like how can we get really efficient but really clear, or if you use a little bit of gray, what other kind of colors are available to try to be and look good, get a lot of daylighting, and still be as comfortable as possible in the house. Outside of that, you start getting into I think from mid Florida up everything's insulated. So you have to do laminated, insulated all along the coast. And that gets really expensive.
What happens? So where does this discussion go when you leave Florida? And I know you have experience elsewhere. All of a sudden, you still have the potentially the same structural requirements, whatever the design pressures are, but you don't have to go through that Florida approval process. So can somebody have an approved product in a 4x6 configuration and then they design to an 8x10 on the project and they don't have to go through that retesting process? Or is it still as stringent in other jurisdictions?
It's going to depend on the local building codes. If you're in a municipality where the building department and the building inspectors that are out there on site are really watching that. I'm just now starting to branch out further in the U.S. I worked throughout the Caribbean, done a little bit of work in Southwest Florida, Naples, Fort Myers, and they get almost as many hurricanes as we get on the southeast side. They tend to be a little bit less severe, but they want to maintain a similar structural rating. So what I found is that there's a little bit less awareness and education about the nuances of the product approvals and the codes, because they're, as you said, they're not as stringent. And then I've been talking with some builders up into like the Carolinas on the coast there, and say that the homeowners want to have impact rated products. Insurance requires hurricane rated products, but they don't really know anything about product approvals. They've never seen a product approval. I mean, they don't know what the details are. Manufacturer tells them, it's like, oh, we tested a PG 45 or something like that. It's like, okay, we're all right, but they don't necessarily know about how it needs to be structurally anchored, or if the manufacturer is really exceeding what their design capabilities are. Like you said, everybody wants bigger, but once you get to those big sizes, there's all different kinds of forces and stresses on the system.
When I had a conversation recently with somebody down in Florida who was discussing the risk of buying into one of these older condo buildings, 60s, 70s, 80s, and how they're all being appraised right now and being hit with these major bills to reshore the building and go through all kinds of structural remediation. Is there a liability with, let's say somebody's buying an existing home and ensuring if the windows are impact rated or not? And does it become an assumption that if the house was built before a certain year, you're likely going to have to replace the windows immediately?
Yeah, I think that goes back to probably the around 2000 or so, because I think Andrew was around 90 or in the early 90s. So by 2000 to 2005, the building codes really started to be much more widely enforced. And everybody was kind of on board with that. So you either had hurricane rated windows or you had shutters at the lower end. And then especially at the higher end after 2005, 2010 for sure, everything was hurricane rated. So I think that you have to be able to have some kind of documentation somewhere for your insurance company. I've heard about people that are looking for the stickers and trying to identify what the manufacturers were, and the insurance companies are looking for that documentation, because insurance is really a problem. It's skyrocketing everywhere, and like down in South Florida, especially for the hurricane codes, it's a overriding factor.
All right, let's go back to our focus now on your kind of focus area on the luxury residential side. So South Florida, laminated glass, not required to be insulated, typically solar heat gain governing, and they just have to put the right low E. Other jurisdictions typically will require insulated. What about the frames? Are they thermally broken?
In Southeast Florida, they're not. As you start getting north, they are. So more manufacturers are testing thermally broken products. Like one of the manufacturers that I'm working with out of Colombia, actually, and they've really grown and innovated a lot, and they've just introduced more thermally broken products because they want to move outside of Florida up into Georgia, Carolinas, other parts of the U.S. and really expand their market. And so they're having to phase out the original products that were tested non-thermally broken that you could only use in Southeast Florida, and replace those. So you have to go through a whole new round of engineering and testing and spending money.
Is it because they weren't meeting the thermal requirements on the projects with a non-thermally broken unit?
Um, Not down here really, but once you get into colder climates, I mean, if it's 20 degrees outside and you got a non-thermally broken aluminum product, and that's going to be ice cold. And that's a major thermal weak point.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent time in Jacksonville and parts of North Florida, and it does get cold. And I mean, I can imagine you also might run into a condensation issue. I mean, I think what they call sweaty windows in Florida, it's kind of the norm. They look at it, the
It's a big
condensation of
problem.
the glass. But is that just everywhere you go?
Well, I was actually having a conversation with my old boss the other day about this, because it was a LinkedIn video. Of course, you learn so much on LinkedIn. It's kind of like YouTube, and they were talking about the indoor humidity, and a lot of people really don't take that into account. And if you've got a very high indoor humidity and you've got that thermal transfer, and the windows are getting cold, then and sometimes your AC cooling down the windows, you're going to get condensation on the outside. So, and we're just in such a high humidity environment in Florida. It's a kind of another unique challenge.
And so all these, they're trying to test out bigger sizes and all this motorized automated hardware. Um, why do you think, I have this conversation all the time across the, call it owner, all the way down to float glass suppliers, so the vendor side of things, that this industry is just so slow to innovate and move, especially on the commercial side. We have the technology and things like backing glass, dynamic glass, automated hardware for operable windows here, and things that we can implement in the commercial market, and people are just so used to doing things the way they do things, and it's very, very, very price driven. Do you think the luxury residential market has really kind of led by example in innovating and testing new boundaries and sort of setting a different trend?
I think so. Kind of like the new Apple Vision VR goggles at $3,500, and you don't have a lot of people that are going to spend that, but that's going to help innovate technology, and that's really done that in the market down here, where before the old standard height was 8 foot tall, and then 10 foot became the standard height. Now the standard height is 12 foot. So if you can't do a 5 foot by 12 foot sliding glass door panel, pockets and corners and the whole thing, then you might as well just go home. And now the new thing is the sight lines, where before you had 3-inch sight lines, and then 2-inch sight lines, and now everybody wants a 1-inch sight line, because the Europeans have come in, and you've got 3 or 4 different European manufacturers that are engineering for the hurricane zones, and they're all about super slim sight lines and concealed everything. And it's like, oh, the new shiny. It's like, oh, we're going to go from spending $90 a square foot to $170 a square foot. It's like, oh, it's like, I heard one of these products saying they're at $700 a square foot now. It's like, wow. I'm used to some crazy numbers, but that one that made me kind of pause for a moment.
Is there a disconnect though between the tested and engineered products in a perfect environment in the test lab or in the plant versus how they're installed on site? That's a major thing in the commercial market, making sure you have a certified or qualified installer, because especially, I mean, something as simple as a outswing or inswing terrace door under high design pressures, if that's not installed properly, you don't get your multi-lock in line and you don't get that tight perimeter compression seal, the sill is going to leak like a sieve. And so you have all these innovative products that installers aren't necessarily comfortable with yet. Is that has that been a tough, steep learning curve for the market?
Huge problem. Huge problem. I think that it may be more difficult in South Florida because the lack of skilled labor, the lack of, and you guys have unions and trades and trade training programs, whereas in South Florida, it's a very transient market. A lot of people are operating in it that really aren't properly trained, and they're just doing the same thing they've always done. And especially because of the change in the architecture from 10 years ago, most homes were fairly traditional with punched openings. And now everything are giant window walls, giant sliding glass doors. Uh, the water infiltration issue, and that is the bane of everybody in the window business in or all facades. And I see just the most horrible installations out there on these multi-million-dollar homes. Posted one the other day when I was driving around from see some sites last week, where they're putting in storefront windows, setting on 1-inch shims, anchors going into the foundations, floor to ceiling from slab to beam, and there's a 1-inch gap, and then they're just going to pack some mud underneath that and call that waterproof and structurally sound. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, I see it all the time. And the same thing with sliding glass doors. And I get calls from builders like, oh, and Ken, can you come take a look at this? I've got leaks over here. It's like I know what's going on, and like you're gonna have to have it taken out and put back in the right way. Like,
Well, that was going to be my
but all the
question is how quickly is that exposed? During construction, the guy wants to build it, move on to his next site. Is it 3 months, post occupancy when you have that big weather event? And is testing on site, quality assurance testing or any type of commissioning common in that market?
So on the single family homes, it depends on the builder, it depends on the dealer. Very few dealers do any of their own testing. The one that I used to work at, and that was part of the process. I put the windows in, seal them, you spray test the whole thing to find any place where you don't have proper caulking. On some of the builders I've seen will do their own testing, just get out there and just spray everything and flood the sills. A lot of these aren't, and I've seen many cases where, and with stone flooring, that's below the stone, and it could be a year before you start seeing the stone discolor and crack, and then you've got major problems. Hardwood flooring, you start seeing that fairly shortly after the first rains. And down here, it's not really just the hurricanes that everybody worries about. Is that, and it's a tropical climate where for the entire rainy season, which is 6 to 9 months long, you're getting sideways blowing rain every single day. So it's that you start seeing these things pretty soon, but it depends on how concealed that is. If it's on the second floor at balconies and that's coming in and it's coming down through the ceiling, you'll see it after the first rain. And I've seen that happen many times.
So there's obviously this challenge, and this is common in the commercial market, but I feel like kind of exasperated in the residential market, this disconnect between what's designed and what's installed, and then how maintainable is it in the field? Can you easily replace those components, let alone if there's glass breakage or failure or something wrong with the framing? Can you even get access to that type of system easily? Is it readily available, rather? And I would think with these specialty products, that lead time or cycle could be greatly extended.
Yeah, if it's just glass breakage, that's one of the things that I always advise clients on. Anything could happen at any time. Thermal stress cracks happen all the time. And that's something you need to be able to plan to be able to access. And depending on how the system is glazed, where your glass stops are, and a lot of times these clients on these homes, they're trying to conceal everything, so all you see is glass. And I always advise, okay, well, it's like you need to think about this and at least leave the glass top exposed, bury the frame so that you can get at this just in case something happens. Your lawn guy's out there and throws a rock, cracks the window. Um, Anything can happen. So it is definitely a consideration because some products really are not easily reglazed in the field without taking all the finishes off and take everything out. And if it's something in a fully captured U channel, then that's a challenge.
When you run up against a leak, though, how often are you interfacing with the installer versus the manufacturer? And do you see a lot of that finger pointing? Do you see involvement from both parties? How does that usually play out?
I, what you try to do is to isolate whether or not that is the installation or if it's the product. You tape off the product, leave the perimeter exposed, spray it down. If you've got leaks, then it's around the perimeter. And then if you're spraying around and you see water coming in through gap somewhere, then it's a forensics job trying to track down where water's coming in. And then sometimes it's coming in somewhere completely different. And I've had cases where there's this one story, the installation manager that I had, he kept getting called out to this house. It was a 2-story, 20-something foot stair opening where it was all glass. And every time it would rain, contractor would say, there's water on the floor during construction. So it's on the slab, but his drywall's starting to go in and he's getting more and more concerned and like goes out there and water testing. It's like, can't find anywhere it's leaking. So the third time he went out there was a perpendicular wall. He went around and looked at it and got up on the second floor and got on the roof and found that there was a light fixture opening on that wall, the masonry wall. So there's a hole in the masonry. Water was getting in through that, running down through the block and coming out on the floor next to the window. Nothing to do with the window. And then in many cases where it's coming straight through the concrete block. And that's one of the big misconceptions down here is that concrete is not waterproof and it's so porous and there's always these dry joints and coming straight through the concrete block. I see it on construction sites all the time during the rainy season, even after stucco is on and after paint. I mean, there's water coming in through the block several feet away from a window. And these are that's one reason that we're seeing more fully waterproofed exteriors, and that's an extra expense that not everybody's planning into their budgets.
Are leak investigations or forensic type work, not from a structural standpoint, just talking air, well, forget air, just water for now. Is that sort of a big opportunity zone? Is it something that's really emphasized in the market?
It's not emphasized, and there's several engineering companies that will come out and do that. They'll do a lot of times they'll do a full bag test. Well, they'll bag it, put pressure on it, and spray it. And those, I don't really think those are a good idea because it's nearly impossible to pass those. Really, just getting out there and doing I think it was the 501.2 test where you spray the whole thing and you look for the leaks, very very carefully.
Wait, let's go back. Let's go back to what you just said, that those are very hard to pass. I agree. I mean, for sure, we're seeing 15 pounds of water, 15 psf, isolated on an operable window, pressurized for 15 minutes, and you'll see a leak 13 and a half minutes in. And is it bulk water? Is it uncontrolled water? A drop?
Just a little bit of water. That's a failure. It's like a couple of drops is a failure.
So it's the first person I've heard that said they don't agree with it, and it's such an interesting topic because for a while there was some interpretation of some standards that they would allow for a 1/3 reduction in the field. So if it's a 15-pound rated window, they'll test to 10 in the field, meaning the installation details or components aren't as ideal as your controlled environment. Yet some are now making the argument that, well, no, if we specified and bought this system, this is what we should get in the field. So it's a delicate area right now, and look, if you're going to go down that pressurized chamber testing path, do it early, but either decide to do it or not, because if you're 90% of the way through construction and then you start and then you identify an issue, what the hell are you going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It really should be done right after installation. Pick an area to test. I had one project where the owner did that, and they found a couple of areas which were just really they hadn't been water tested properly by the installation team, and that really should have been found at installation before they did a bag test on it. Well, that was just dumb. But again, it comes down to the installation and who's the installer and who's the supervisor. You know how it is. Like the guy out there with the drill gun and the caulk gun, I mean, they're not necessarily always as meticulous as your team supervisors, and your supervision is where it all comes down to making sure that everybody adheres to checking every step of the process. And I love that about your videos, and you're drilling down into all these different components that have to come together. And I think a lot of people don't realize just how complex the window side is. And I had many builders that have appreciated that. The windows are one of the hardest parts of building a custom home, and they're the second biggest ticket on the item. I don't know about commercial construction, but on a single family home, and these luxury homes, you've got the concrete shell, and then you've got the windows. And in a typical project that I've worked on, a minimum $300,000 worth of windows, $500,000 to $1 million worth of windows on a single family home, and it's a pretty significant investment that really needs to be like. And you don't want to take your Rolls Royce down to the corner car shop to get work done, right?
And so is the bulk of that in the material or the installation? Meaning you get that $700 square foot number. Is it $550 in material and $150 in installation?
It's 75% material, 25, sometimes 30% on installation.
So it's not necessarily the owners or GCs or contractors going cheap on the install. It's just a lack of quality labor force.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they're spending so much money on these Ferrari systems, and then why would they go cheap on the install?
I think it's a lack of, well, and frankly, there's just not many window companies in the South Florida market that understand the complexities of these systems, because again, for so long they've just been doing the small punched openings, a French door, or maybe a small sliding glass door, and a couple of casement windows with a transom, and it's like maybe it has a radius, and that's as complicated as they get. Now you've got these really massive complex systems that take a much higher level of expertise to plan for and execute, and it's just not the level of skill out there. I mean, there's a few, but then not everybody's willing to pay the difference between the companies that take the extra time. You know, it is, everything is time and materials. And the people that take more time are going to cost more, because you're not just slapping these things in, you're taking the time to laser it and check every single detail, make sure every step of the way is done, and then you're water testing it, and it takes significantly more time. So the installation increase in labor for a really high quality company, and they're probably charging a little bit higher margin on the products too, to help absorb the overhead, because you typically have a more skilled workforce, you're paying those people more. They've been in the industry for 20-30 years, and what I've seen over the past 20 years or so is typically the first time a builder works with a dealer, they kind of see whether or not they can perform. There's a lot of cost pressures, but once a builder has a dealer that can at least do a reasonably good job, they're very reluctant to change, because it's such a liability to take a chance on somebody else who's going to be worse.
Not what we see in the commercial market, but no, that's nice. That's no, it makes sense. That's nice to hear.
Yeah, I think commercial is a lot more one-off transactional, whereas with a luxury home builder, they like to establish a team of people that they work with, that they can rely on. Everybody knows how they operate. They operate at a level of quality and attention to detail. And when that works well, it's fantastic. It's rare to see, and it's always shocked me, because the level of these homes, we're going 20, 30, 50, 60 million dollar homes now and up. I mean, we've got $100 million homes going on down here, and the prices are going up, but the expertise hasn't necessarily caught up with that. And you've got so many people that are just not, and they may have a nice portfolio and they can say, oh, I've done really nice houses, but you don't know just what nightmares those houses were to get built.
Right.
And they're getting these jobs, and it's a really Wild West kind of place. It's would surprise a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. All right, Ken, where is the best place for people to reach out to you if they want to pick your brain on fenestration or even get involved in a design?
Well, my website is Origin Project Consultants LLC, I think. Yep, kind of long. Origin Project Consultants LLC. It's long. I forget what's on there. I spend all my time on LinkedIn, so I'm certainly easy to find on LinkedIn. Just Ken Sandlin. At least I've got that. And yeah, I am hoping that I've just started this independent consulting, so I'm hoping that I can help from design development through planning construction and helping select a good window company, and then making sure that it all comes together. My passion is trying to help these projects execute better. It hurts my soul to see these beautiful works of architectural art that are just so problematic.
Yeah.
So problematic.
No, I feel it, and I appreciate it. So thanks for coming on, Ken. And
I appreciate the time. It's really nice
Everybody
to
check
meet you.
him out on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Adrian.
All right, take care.